The UK isn't the only country where rail workers have gone on strike. In Australia, the rail union has ordered a series of strikes in Sydney around concerns over the safety of new trains. And along with downing tools and limiting the hours they'll work, Australian rail workers have another tactic at their disposal. We're going to play a clip from Sky Australia in 1 second, but just to explain beforehand, Opal is a smart card payment system used on Sydney's stations.
Sydney rail staff are expected to leave Opal gates open from today until September 6 as part of industrial action over pay and safety. Passengers are being asked to still tap on and off their journeys. If they don't, the potential loss of ticketing revenue could be up to $10 million. More work stoppages are planned for the airport and Bankstown lines on Wednesday.
It's a genius idea, and it's called a revenue strike. It keeps the trains running, but doesn't charge travellers to use them. Everybody wins, except the bosses, of course. People can still get around, only now it's for free, while the unions are still able to deprive the companies of the revenue their labour generates. So why don't the RMT union do this kind of industrial action here? A viewer put that question to Mick Lynch on Talk TV.
Now, I don't know why you don't do what the Japanese do, which is keep on running the service. Just don't take fare. Let people get on for free. Screw the companies, not the people.
It's interesting. Screw the companies, not the people. Keep the service going. That's the punter. That's how I wanted to do it. I think that's important, right?
Yeah, that is important. I understand exactly what that gentleman's saying, and it's disruption. We would love to do the type of action that he's described. Guess what? The Conservative government has made that illegal for decades. We cannot do that. If we do that, they will sequestrate my union, fine us millions of pounds and shut us down. That is illegal industrial action in this country. We've explored that with our lawyers, and they won't let us do it. We would love to run that service, even at the cost of sacrificing some of our pay, perhaps. But a revenue strike, as it's called, it's been used in Australia and Japan very successfully so that we can run the system on behalf of the people and be empathetic with their needs. As that gentleman was pointing out, we're blocked from doing that by the law.
Mick Lynch is right. Among the many anti-union laws passed by the Thatcher and Major governments was one which allows companies to sue trade unions if they encourage customers not to pay for the services they use. So you could essentially bankrupt the trade union for something like a revenue strike. And that was just one of many laws that banned trade unions from taking more unconventional action. Another significant one was a ban on secondary strikes. They are when workers working for different employers go on strike to support industrial action in another business or sector. They're legal in most other countries, and until the 1980s, they had been legal in the UK since 1946. Aaron, when it comes to trade union rights, we're still living in Thatcher's world, aren't we?
Very much so. We're looking at the most repressive trade union and labour laws certainly in Europe. What I do find interesting is when people sort of have these little nuggets and they say, have you thought of this? As if these weren't live debates in the trade union movement for 40 years, given the deluge of political attacks they and their members have been subject to. You saw the NUM, which was Britain's most powerful trade union in 1983-84 with the miners' strike throughout the mid-80s, let's say. You saw it destroyed systematically by the Conservative government. And the reason why the National Union of Miners, the NUM, was destroyed was because it had political leverage and power. That was why. It could help to remove a government if that government was unfair and unscrupulous with its members, which is precisely what happened in 1974 when they contributed, so the common sense and received wisdom was, to the demise of the Heath government in 1974. And of course, Labour came back in, Harold Wilson came back in. And so the NUM, as a result, had to be destroyed because it was an accumulation of workers' power. It gave workers not only industrial muscle in the workplace to argue for higher wages, but it also gave them a political, not just voice, political leverage in the national life of the country to affect certain outcomes in terms of socialist or social democratic policy, in terms of public services and the social wage, in terms of basically not rigging the system in favor of the rich constantly. So if you look at what the NUM was, what's the equivalent for the Tories? It's kind of like the City of London, right? So you smash your opponent's source of strength and power, organised labour, and you unleash your own one the 1% and the financial parasites in the City of London. You get the big bang, deregulation, Canary Wharf, financialization on steroids. So that's the context that people like Mick Lynch have been working in for 30, 40 years. Mick Lynch started as a trade unionist in the 1990s, 1980s. I mean, he gets really into things in the 1990s because he goes to work in on the Eurotunnel project. That's where he cuts his teeth as a member of the RMT. As I understand it, he'd been blacklisted from the construction industry at that point. Look, I mean, I don't mean to be mean to the gentleman asking the question, but somebody like Mick Lynch has been thinking and acting on these kinds of questions and problems his entire working life. Have you thought of this? I would like to see a little bit more. The assumption is that unions are stupid. They don't know what they're doing. They got defeated by the Tories and successive governments because they weren't up to the task. They're dinosaurs. They're incapable. No, these are very organized, highly intelligent, sophisticated people. They're the best of the best. They lost because they were smashed by the overwhelming force of the British state during the 1980s. By the way, that wasn't in the public's interest. It wasn't in the British national interest, I think, for a bunch of reasons. We won't sort of talk about them here. So that would be my takeaway, Michael. We're still in Thatcher's world, and I think people should sort of move beyond the cliches of thinking that trade unions don't think very hard and rigorously about how we move beyond it. Look at things like Enough is Enough. They're making the grounds and the hard yards on this, far more than the London big house pundits and the policy wonks in SW1.
I'm going to push back on a technicality and for self-interested reasons defend the right to ask stupid questions, because I feel like the fact that guy asked that question meant that we got that interesting answer from Mick Lynch. And that does apply to actually lots of areas of union struggle where I think people have these, what seem like quite natural and reasonable critiques of trade unions and strikes. You often hear people say, well, why don't they strike for other people's wages? Why are they only striking for their own wages? Well, because it's illegal, actually. Trade unions used to strike for other people's wages. That was, the concept of solidarity. Now, trade union laws are such that you can very specifically only strike for your own conditions, and it has to be sort of like a material issue. So you can't, go on strike to try and stop a war. I mean, you could. You're not going to get thrown in prison if you do it, but you're not going to be protected from losing your job. So you only have protections to go on strike if your action falls within these very specific parameters, which were massively tightened under the Thatcher and Major government and haven't really been expanded since. We still live within that regime, which means that many of the things that you might think, well, why don't they do this? Why don't they do that? If they're not doing it, it's more often than not because it's illegal to do it. They can't strike in solidarity with other people. They can't just open the ticket barriers. They have to very specifically go on strike for their own benefit. Otherwise, it's illegal. Like it is almost, and this was quite clever of Thatcher, really, wasn't it? It's sort of like saying, my analysis of trade unions, I'm being Thatcher here. My analysis of trade unions is they are a self-interested part of the economy. They're just trying to increase their own wages and use their leverage to disrupt society until they get those wages. So that's her sort of cynical analysis of trade unions. And then she makes laws so that trade unions are actually only allowed to behave in that way. So she's saying they're selfish, and then she bans them from doing anything that would obviously not be selfish. Obviously, I don't think people striking for their own wages is selfish, but you see where I'm going with this.
I think it's a very astute observation, Michael, and I reverse my previous conclusion. We should have more stupid questions.